All right, can you guys hear me now? Yay! Okay. My goodness. That was crazy. Okay, I am so sorry, everybody. I don't know what was happening. It is a Monday. All right, I will go ahead and get started. Thank you guys for all of the wonderful response. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so without further ado, now that everyone can hear me, welcome, welcome, welcome. This is going to be our week one, our first week of our ICD 10 CM Guideline Mastery session. My name is Ms. Haley. I'm going to be your lead instructor for the class. I see some familiar faces. I see some new people. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be a part of this class. I believe that mastering the guidelines in the ICD-10 CM book is a great way to set a solid foundation for real-life coding scenarios. So I'm going to be using the ICD-10 CM coding book as well as the MCG manual. So make sure to keep those handy during this class. Also, please keep in mind we're going to be using the most updated book. So we're going to be using the 2026. So if you're using the 2025 book or one older, it may be organized a little differently, but you'll still be able to follow along just fine. Hello, everyone. So yes, so like I said, we are in week one. So we're going to start with just guideline basics and go over some general coding guidelines. The way the flow of this class is going to work is that we are going to we're going to warm up with a little bit of like a Jeopardy class. So we're going to be doing some true or false questions, and these are all going to be taken out of straight from the guidelines, straight from the MCG book, and then we'll go over some of them so you guys can look back on this if you're studying, and then we're going to go into some in-depth scenarios. We're just going to do 2 of them today, and then we'll move on to 3 next class. All right. All right, and so before I get started, we are going to go over our copyright. So I'm going to read this super quick. So ICD-10 CM copyright 2026, American Medical Association, all rights reserved. Fee schedules, relative value units, conversion factors, and or related components are not assigned by the AMA and are not part of CBT or AMCI ICD-10, and the AMA is not recommending their use. The AMA does not directly or indirectly practice medicine or dispense medical services. The AMA assumes no liability for data contained or not contained. ICD-10-CM is a registered trademark of AAPC. AAPC content found within this presentation is copyrighted AAPC, keyword concept FTR, CHUN, AMCI Fab 7, AMCI ICD-10, FLIP, TAP, and MCG are trademarks of AMCI. The credentials CPC, CRC, COC, CPMA, CPB, CPPM, CPCO are owned by AAPC. AMCI does not own the right to these credentials. The credentials CCA, CCS, CCS-P, RHIA, RHIT are owned by AHEMA. AMCI does not own the rights to these credentials. Whew. All right. That was a mouthful. All right, so like I said, we are going to warm up with like a Jeopardy-ish question. Next class, since, this is just week one, we're getting the hang of it. Next class, we'll do a live session so you guys can compete against each other. But for now, while we're warming up, just put your answers in the chat. Make sure to keep up that participation. And if at any point you have a question, or if you want to leave some feedback because you have to leave the session early, we are going to go ahead and post the survey in the chat. And so it's going to be a link and you can click on that so you can provide some feedback for the class, and you can also ask a question if you need a little bit more of an in-depth scenario explanation. Thank you so much, Ms. Dolly. She just posted that right there. I will go ahead and yep, so that is going to be pinned in there. And so you guys can click on that. If you have to leave early, make sure to definitely fill that out or ask your question on there if it does not get answered in the chat. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for a second, and I'm going to go ahead and grab our review game. So like I said, this is going to be Jeopardy game. And then this is all going to be taken directly out of our MCG book. All righty. Perfect. All righty. That I don't mean to. We don't want to have that theme music. All right. So these are going to be the categories. They're all kind of going to be general. So one of the categories is going to be signs and symptoms, and then the other two are just going to be from the IB section. So just general coding guidelines. All right. So I will start off with just an easy 100 question. And like I said, these are all going to be true or false. So just make sure to put those answers in the chat. All right. So, our first question, true or false? Always verify the proper code using the alphabetic index and main term reference. Is this going to be true or false? Hello, hello, welcome everyone. Is it going to be true or false? Make sure to put those answers in the chat. I'll give you guys a few seconds with this one. All right, amazing. I'm getting some awesome answers in there. And indeed, this is going to be true. Definitely always make sure to start with your alphabetic index and main term references when you are looking up a code for sure. Great job. All right, let's move on to signs and symptoms for 200. Again, true or false? When there is a definitive diagnosis, code all signs and symptoms, even if they are integral to the diagnosis. Is this going to be true or false? I'll give you guys a few seconds with this one and good luck. All right, you guys are on top of it this session. So, yes, you would be correct. This is going to be false. I think everyone got this one. Great job. And the reason that makes it false is that you in the MCG book, it says you do not assign additional codes for signs and symptoms routinely associated with a disease process. So, if it if someone has like coughing and then they also have pneumonia, you wouldn't code pneumonia and coughing because coughing is integral to the disease. So that is what makes that false. Amazing job, everyone. And like I said, I'm going to quickly go over the guideline reference that I used for all of these afterwards. So if you want to kind of see which guideline I got it from, then we'll be able to go over that after this. So don't you worry. All right, let's do a 301. All right, true or false? Do not assign multiple codes when a combination code sufficiently describes the condition. Is this going to be true or false? What do we think? Give you guys a second. All right, I'm getting a lot of responses. And yes, this is indeed going to be true. This kind of piggybacks on the other one. So yes, you do not have multiple codes when a combination code sufficiently describes the condition. We're working smarter, not harder, and we don't need to add those codes if we don't need to. All right, let's go back to signs and symptoms for 100. All right, true or false? If there is not a definitive diagnosis, code signs and symptoms. True or false? All right. Amazing job. Indeed, this is going to be another true one. If there's not a definitive diagnosis, we are going to be coding these signs and symptoms. Great job. All right, let's move back to a 301, general coding guidelines. True or false? All right, this is a long one. So, if the same condition is described as both acute and chronic, and separate sub-entries exist in the alphabetical index at the same indentation level, code both sequence chronic code first. All right, I know that's a lot. So if there is a code that is both acute and chronic, how are we coding it? Are we coding both and sequencing chronic code first? What are we thinking? True or false? All right. I thought that I was being a little sneaky. I thought that I could, get past on this one, but you guys are just on top of it. Yes, this is false. So when there is a chronic and an acute, if they're both being coded, you are going to code the acute or the subacute first. That is going to be our first listed. Amazing job, guys. I thought that one was a little tricky, but you guys are on it. All right, let's get this 100 out of the way for this general coding guidelines. All right, report each ICD-10 CM diagnosis and code only once per encounter. True or false? Are we coding only one ICD-10 CM diagnosis? You're going to code it only once per encounter. All right, great job, great job. Yes, this is going to be true. Indeed, yes. There's no reason to be adding all those extra codes, and you only need to be coding one diagnosis. If there's a diagnosis, you're only coding that diagnosis once per encounter. Great job, everyone. All right, let's do a 200. All right. Ooh, sequela. So true or false, a sequela code can be used regardless of the time elapsed since the acute phase of a condition or injury. True or false? Yes, exactly. Each encounter is a standalone. All right. I love the explanations that we're providing in the chat too. You guys are killing it in the chat. Keep up that participation. Great job. All right, and since the answers are flying in, indeed, this is going to be another true. Yes, a sequela code can be used regardless of time elapsed. Amazing job. All right, let's do another 200. All right. If documentation does not identify the side of an injury, use the right side as the default code. Yes, you guys are crushing it. I completely agree. All right, what do we think about this one? If documentation does not identify the side, use the right side as the default code. All right, so this one is a little split. So the answer for this one is going to be false. The answer for this one is going to be false. We're not talking about like right dominant or left dominant because that would be a different topic altogether. We're talking about if the documentation does not identify a side you're going to assign a code for unspecified side. There isn't going to be a default for that one. You're just going to do unspecified if the documentation does not identify the side. Yes. Amazing job. Yes. Or you can query. Yes, but you definitely, if there is an unspecified code that you can choose, you're going to choose the unspecified. All right. And last but not least, yes, laterality. That is the laterality. That's exactly the guideline that I used. Great job. All right. So in this last signs and symptoms, all right, is going to be true or false. Code additional signs and symptoms that are not routinely linked to a disease process. What do we think? Let's end on a good note. You guys have been absolutely killing these true or false questions. Let's end on a good note. I see the answers are already coming in. I'll give you guys a few more seconds. All right, indeed. Everyone killed this one. Yes, it is going to be true. It is going to be true. So if the signs and symptoms are not related to the disease, then you are going to code them. Great job. Great job, guys. That was an amazing Jeopardy game. And we're definitely going to be keeping that true or false, warm up. We're definitely going to be doing that for the future classes too. So I hope that you guys liked that. Amazing. All right. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for a second. And then we are going to, I'm just going to go over the guideline references that I used for these questions so that if you guys want to go back and you guys want to look at which guideline I referenced for these questions to get a little bit of extra practice, because these are going to be, this is going to be a recorded session, obviously, so you're going to be able to look back. So if you want to, we'll just quickly click through these. All right. So for the first section, which was the signs and symptoms, these are all of the questions that I asked. These are the answers, and then these are going to be the guidelines that I used for each one. So we see the true, and of course, like I said, the reason that this one was false was just because you're not going to assign additional codes for signs and symptoms routinely associated with a disease process. So that's what made that false. All right, and then in the next column, these are going to be all the questions, all of the answers. And then, like we went over in the last question, the reason that made that false was because if there's an acute or if they're in a chronic at the same time, you're going to code the acute first. All right, and then this is going to be the last category that we went over. Again, questions, guideline references, and the reason that this one was false was because if the documentation does not identify a side, you're going to assign a code for unspecified side. All right. Amazing job. Okay, I know that I went over those kind of fast. We can just take a little breather, take a little pause. How are we feeling? I think you guys did absolutely amazing. I mean, you guys are definitely mastering some guidelines, that's for sure. I'm loving all the participation. You guys are doing great. Let me know in the chat how we're feeling. And we are going to move on to while you guys are typing in the chat and letting me know, I'm going to explain our next kind of game that we're going to be doing. So we're going to move on to a Quizlet kind of game. So I am going to provide a coding scenario, and we're going to be breaking it down 3 different ways. So we're going to identify the key words in the scenario. Then we're going to identify the guideline we're going to be using in this scenario. And then finally, we are going to be putting it all together, and we're going to be finding the exact code that we're going to use to code this scenario. So I think this is a great way to definitely understand exactly what you're doing, so you'll be able to break it down. And when you are taking that coding exam and it's just multiple choice, you'll be able to be faster in identifying stuff, so we can hopefully save some time on our exam. All right, so I am going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to grab our Quizlet. All righty, I'm gonna grab that and read our first scenario. And then after we do all of them, we can go over what it all looks like put together. All righty. So this is going to be our first scenario. So I'll read it for you guys. A 30-year-old woman is experiencing dizziness with nausea and vomiting. The provider documents auditory vertigo of both ears, possible Meniere's disease. What ICD-10-CM keywords are reported? No, this is I'm using the 2026. So I'm using the 2026 MCG. So all of those guidelines that I just put in there, they should all be the updated 2026 book, all the stuff that I'm using from that. All right, so yeah, so for this, we are just for right now, we're going to move on to, coding and stuff later. But for right now, I just want you guys to identify what keywords that we're going to be reporting, what keywords we're going to be focusing on to lead us to that final coding sequence or code that we're going to be looking for. I'll give you guys a few seconds. Yes, like I said, if you have the book for 2025, that's totally fine. I don't think that there is any crazy updates that they've done to the general coding guidelines. So you'll still be able to follow along totally fine if you still have your 2025 book. So it is definitely not the end of the world if you are, using 2025. So definitely not the end of the world. All right, but I'll give you guys a few more seconds to put in those keywords and then we will go over it. All right, I'm getting some awesome answers. So yes, so these are the code words that I am going to be focusing on. So like a lot of you said, I'm going to be focusing on the dizziness, the nausea, the vomiting, the auditory vertigo, and then the possible Meniere's disease. That is what I'm going to be focusing on. I know that a lot of you guys put that in. I know that's a lot to type. So if you put that in the chat, amazing job. All right. And then what we're going to be moving on to next, we're going to be sticking with the same scenario, but now we are going to move on to what guideline we're thinking about using. And again, the guideline that we're going to be using is from the general coding guideline chapter. So those are the ones that we're going to be using for these scenarios. So that kind of shortens it down, so you're not looking at all of the guidelines. But yes, for this specific scenario, using those keywords, what ICD-10-CM guideline are we going to be reporting? You can either put like the number, or you can put the title of what it is. So give it a shot, and then I will go over it in just a second. All righty, amazing job. If you got that. Sometimes finding the very specific guideline is a little difficult. So the guideline we're going to be using is IB5 from the MCG manual, and it's going to be conditions that are integral part of a disease process. So if you got that one right, or if you provided some explanation in the chat, amazing job. All right, and now the last part. I see you, Vina. You already know. All right. So now we are going to move on to the last part and what ICD 10 CM code or codes are going to be reported from using that guideline and using those keywords. I'll give you guys a few seconds. You guys are already putting your answers in the chat. You're super quick, but I'll give everyone a few more seconds. Good luck. All right. If you are still working on that code, that is totally fine. I'm not going to give the answer away just yet. I am just going to switch over to the PowerPoint so that we can see, so that we can kind of see what everything looks like all put together. All right. Moving back to that. All right. Okay. So this is our scenario. So again, 30-year-old woman experiencing dizziness and nausea and vomiting. The provider documents auditory vertigo of both ears, possible Meniere's disease. What codes are we reporting? So, like we said, the keywords we're going to be using are that dizziness, the vomiting, the auditory vertigo, and possible Meniere's disease. And then the guideline we're going to be using is this one right here. This is a snippet from the MCG manual. So this is going to be guideline IB5. So conditions that are an integral part of a disease process. So kind of like we were saying when we were going through our Jeopardy game, our true or false. So do not assign additional codes for signs and symptoms associated with a disease process. So I would say a big keyword is possible Meniere's disease. So when you're looking at that, you can see that it is a possible diagnosis. So since that is that keyword and it's saying possible, then it is not going to be reported. And so per this guideline right here, the signs and symptoms that are associated with the disease. So we're going to be coding, instead of the disease, we're going to be coding that dizziness, nausea, vomiting, symptoms of vertigo. Oh my gosh, vertigo. So with that being said, we are going to look at this vertigo right here because that is what has been documented, the auditory vertigo of both ears. And it being said both ears, that's meaning that it is bilateral. So this is the main term you're going to be using, the peripheral vertigo. And then you're going to move on to the oral vertigo. And since it needs 6 characters, you're going to move all the way down and you are going to select H81.313, oral vertigo bilateral. So if you got that right, absolutely amazing. And yes, so using the guideline, we don't have to code the dizziness, the nausea, or the vomiting because it is an integral part of the vertigo disease. So that is why we're only using that one code and we're not coding all of the signs and symptoms. All right, and I believe that so many people got that in the chat. So that is absolutely amazing. The chat is on fire. I totally agree. You guys killed that one. All right. That was super impressive. All right. I am going to stop sharing my screen yet again, and we are going to move on to our next scenario. We're going to be doing the same the same situation. We're going to be breaking it down. You guys did awesome with that one. All righty. So this is going to be our next scenario. All right. Whoop, not that. Okay, so our next scenario. An 8-month-old is seen by the pediatrician today for ear pulling and excessive crying. The infant is diagnosed with bilateral chronic and acute serious otitis media. So, with looking at this scenario, what keywords are we going to be looking at in order to code this? I'll give you guys a few seconds to put those answers in the chat, and good luck. All right. I'm very impressed. I'm also very impressed that you guys are able to type so fast and while you're putting your answers in the chat. That is crazy. All right. So these are what I at least am pulling out of this scenario. So the ear pulling I'm focusing on, excessive crying I'm focusing on, and the chronic and acute serious otitis media, which everyone is putting in the chat. So absolutely amazing. And you already know how it goes. We are going to move on to what guideline, again, same scenario, same keywords we're focusing on. What guideline are we going to be using from our general coding guidelines? Are we going to be using to code this scenario? I'll give you guys a few seconds for this one. All right, amazing job indeed. We are going to be using the guideline IB8, acute and chronic conditions. I also saw that someone put in the chat the code IB. Oh, a few people put in the chat code IB5. So that could definitely work. That could definitely work as well. So if you put that or if you put the IB8, amazing job. All right. And then last but not least, now we are going to put it all together. Same scenario, guidelines, keywords, and now what ICD-10 CM code or codes are going to be reported for this scenario. Yes, excellent guideline referencing. Great job, everyone. But I'll give you guys a few seconds to determine what codes we are going to be using for this scenario, and then we will go over all of the things. So I'll give you guys a few seconds. Good luck. All right, if you are still working on these codes, don't worry. I will not give away the answer just yet. I'm just going to switch over to our PowerPoint so we can see how everything looks all put together. All right, amazing. Okay, so this is going to be our scenario. 8-month-old seen by the pediatrician for ear pulling, excessive crying. The infant is diagnosed with bilateral chronic and acute serous otitis media. What guidelines are we reporting? So, like we said, first off, we're going to be focusing on the ear pulling, the excessive crying, and then the chronic and serious otitis media. The guideline that we're going to be using is going to be this acute and chronic condition, so IB8. Again, this is just a clip from the MCG manual, and then like some other people said, we can also use the guideline IB5 as well if we wanted to do that. So with doing this, like this guideline says, when a condition is diagnosed as acute and chronic, and there are different codes for each, you're going to be reporting both codes and you're going to be sequencing the acute code first. So you're going to go to the alphabetic index, like we were talking about when we went over our review in the beginning, and you're going to look for the otitis media serous, which directs you to the otitis media. All right, this acute serous otitis media, because we're going to be coding the acute first according to the guidelines. So then it requires 5 characters. So when you go all the way down, we're going to be coding again using these keywords. We're going to be focusing on the bilateral. So if you go down to bilateral, our first code is going to be this H65.03. And then afterwards, we have to code for the chronic. So we're going to be using the same technique, going to the alphabetical index, and we're going to be looking for the otitis media non-supportive chronic. And this is going to lead you to this chronic serous otitis media. Again, it needs 5 characters. So we are going to go all the way down, and we are going to be focusing on this bilateral right here because that's what it's saying in the scenario. And so that's going to lead you to code H65.23. So your final codes are going to be the H65.03 and H65.23. And you're going to be coding for acute, and then you're going to be coding for the chronic. All right. Did that explanation make sense? I know some of you guys didn't even need the explanation. You guys did absolutely amazing putting those answers in the chat. That was great. Everyone really knows their general coding guidelines. That is most impressive. All right. Nice job, everyone. Nice job. Amazing. All right. So that is all that we have for today. I know that we are getting out a little early. I know these almost always last an hour. I thought that we were going to take a little more time for the scenarios. So I'm going to do 3 scenarios next class so that we can break them down even more. So definitely we'll do that so that we can get reviews. So next week, we're going to be focusing on the infectious diseases guidelines for our week 2. So definitely make sure that you brush up on those. The next class is just going to be next Monday, and then this class specifically is an 8-week session, and so we're on week 1 now, and so then we're going to move on. And so yes, like I said, next week is going to be infectious diseases, but if you have any questions about this class specifically, or if you have any feedback so that we can make these classes better for you guys and improve so you guys can learn as much as you possibly can, the survey has already been posted in the chat, so please, please, please make sure that you click on that and let us know how we're doing, or if you have any questions, and we will definitely get back to you with a response as soon as possible. And I hope to see you guys all here next week at 7 p.m. Usual time. I hope that everyone had a great time. Thank you guys so much for joining, and we hope to see you next week. Thank you so much, and have a great night.
4,000 exam passers and free classes at AMCI. Learn to code straight from home or on the road at AMCI. We're on the East Coast, the West Coast. We're all around.